Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning Five here on Friday, June 26th, 2020. I am Dave Biddle. I am joined by Patrick Murphy. A lot of recruiting to get into, Patrick. Then we'll get into other matters of business. But let's start with the recruiting dead period being extended an extra month. So now the recruiting dead period has been extended through August 31st. Not a big surprise, Patrick, but for the listeners that don't know what that means, the coaches can still have electronic communication. They can still place phone calls with recruits. It just means there's no in-person recruiting. So coaches can't go out on the road to recruit in person, and you can't have official visits, and you can't have unofficial visits. So, again, Patrick, not a surprise, but, again, just the recruiting. Some people were hoping that maybe August some visits could happen. It's not going to happen until September at the earliest.
Definitely not surprising, given, we've seen spikes in various states around the country of coronavirus cases and hospitalizations and whatnot. So this was to be expected. And I think we were all hoping that there would be positive signs in recruiting, opening that up, letting players visit, letting in-person communication happen would certainly be a positive sign. But yeah, like I said, it's not a surprise. A little disappointing, but Ohio State has done a pretty good job when they haven't been able to have kids on campus or go visit them this offseason. It's slowed a little bit right now, but the Buckeyes have continued to hold tight to the number one class and increase their lead on that. So, it hasn't been a huge issue for Ohio State, but you would like to see it. Obviously, there's kids that would like to take their visits and, coaches that would like to get back on the road. So, everyone's eager for that to happen, and that'll certainly be a sign that things are moving in the right direction, but we're just not quite there yet.
That's right. And speaking of recruiting, the Buckeyes got a decommitment yesterday in their 2021 class. It's very interesting on many levels. A lot to unpack here. Devonta Smith, three-star corner from Cincinnati LaSalle, decommitted. And it's so interesting because what we're basically hearing is it was mutual. And as I like to say in breakups, I don't care if it's in recruiting or in romantic relationships, it's never mutual, in my opinion. Maybe there's exceptions to the rule. Sounds like Ohio State cooled on him. And it also, we know for sure that when he started looking elsewhere, Ohio State didn't try and keep him in the class. This isn't like when Jansen Dunn started looking at Oklahoma and they're like, okay, we want you. Like, we really want you. We'll put the full court press on you. We want you, Jansen Dunn. They didn't do that. This is a kid from Cincinnati, Kerry Combs' backyard. Kerry Combs and the staff didn't really try and keep him in the class. Sounds like Ohio State's completely cooled on him, Patrick. What else is interesting is Alabama is now interested in him. So we could have a situation of a kid from Ohio who doesn't think he's good enough to play at Ohio State, but thinks he's good enough to play at Alabama. It's just like a parallel universe we're living in here, and I'm all for it.
It is interesting. I think from what I understand of the situation, Ohio State has some other defensive backs committed. They're obviously still recruiting cornerbacks in this class. Kerry Combs is despite not being able to visit guys, as we just talked about, working pretty hard to land some more cornerbacks. That was unsettling, I guess. And you can understand that, a three-star kid, obviously an in-state kid that Ohio State liked and thought he could, be a player here, but he sees the class is starting to fill up at that position and there may be more guys on the way. So understandable from both perspectives, I guess. I've seen a couple people super concerned about this cornerback recruiting class. And, I think you have to look at it as defensive backs. I know that they peg guys as cornerbacks or safeties, but we've seen those guys switch so much when they get to college, not just at Ohio State, but other places. And Ohio State's at a pretty good spot. Caleb Johnson, the four-star cornerback, Andre Turrentine, Denzel Burke, who will end up in the defensive backfield, and Jalen Johnson, a three-star athlete that is a teammate of Smith's at LaSalle. So I've seen people kind of freaking out a little bit, and I think, calm down. They already have 4 defensive backs committed. They're going for others that they feel pretty good about, specifically Jordan Hancock, who is currently committed to Clemson. And it's certainly hard to get guys to flip from Clemson, but Ohio State likes their chances here. Obviously, they were in the running with Hancock here for a while now. So, I think it is an interesting situation. You don't often see a Ohio prospect flip away from the Buckeyes. But like you said, if this was a mutual thing, if Ohio State kind of had their eyes elsewhere and that made Smith decide to also look elsewhere and somebody like Alabama gets in the mix, you can understand kind of both perspectives there, I guess.
Yeah, again, it speaks volumes to me that once Ohio State found out that he was looking elsewhere, they were like, okay, cool. That's not a kid that you're wanting to keep in the class. They would have put the full court press on him if they wanted to keep him. Maybe I should say man press coverage if they wanted to keep him, but go ahead.
Well, and I think real quick, just, the Buckeyes, and I think this has been pretty evident since Ryan Day took over, they obviously want guys that want to be at Ohio State and have a passion for that and whatnot. And obviously with having the number one class, you don't need to beg kids, So if he was looking elsewhere, regardless of what the reason is, I can understand Ohio State, saying, okay, they're not like Clemson that says you can't go visit elsewhere or whatnot. So I can understand the perspective here from Ohio State of, if you're not all in 100% on this class, like we believe many of the other guys are, then, you want to look around, that's fine by us.
But again, if they really wanted him, like Paris Johnson committed to Urban Meyer. Then when Urban retired, Ryan Day took over, and there was a lot of talk that Paris Johnson was looking elsewhere, and Ohio State was like, we want you so bad. Like, it wasn't like, well, okay, if you're not all in, we don't really want you. It was like, sure, we want you. But a little different when we're talking about the number one offensive tackle in the country, 5-star player, number one player in Ohio, as opposed to a 3-star corner. But still, I hear what you're saying. And you mentioned this earlier. Jordan Hancock committed to Clemson. It was basically down to Ohio State, Clemson, and maybe one other school. I think it was basically an Ohio State-Clemson battle early, and he really liked Ohio State, young man from Georgia. Picked Clemson. Now there's some smoke that Ohio State is back in it. You even had Jordan Hancock on Twitter. Maybe he's just trying to have some fun, Patrick. But for those who didn't see it, right when the Devonta Smith was decommitting news was starting to break on Twitter before Devonta Smith even announced it, Jordan Hancock very cryptically posted the wide eyes on Twitter. Immediately, you have Travion Henderson, the 5-star running back, the number one running back in the country, Ohio State commit, getting in on that. They were having a little bit of dialogue with that. So you got a lot of people on the front row message board, Patrick, that are now, I don't want to say confident, but maybe, hopeful that the Buckeyes can flip Jordan Hancock, the number 6 corner in the country, very high 4-star prospect, knocking on the door to be a 5-star. But like you said, he's a kid from the South. He's committed to Clemson. Clemson does a great job of holding on to their recruits. So if I had to guess, if you put a gun to my head, first of all, I'd be mad that you put a gun to my head, sir. I would say he's going to stay with Clemson, but it sounds like Ohio State has more than a puncher's chance here.
I agree. I think that, you have a player like that who had some interest, and maybe you sense that there's a bit of wavering, and that doesn't mean he's going to flip, but if you have a chance to kind of try and get back in on a kid that talented, I think you certainly do. So that makes sense. But like we both said now, we don't see many decommits from Clemson, and it's just because of what a great job they do down there in the Carolinas. So, if Ohio State is going to go all in on Hancock, it's going to be a dogfight, and they've gone head to head with Clemson before, so they'll be prepared. And obviously, if this is the number one target to try and replace that spot in the class, I think they'll be ready to fight for it.
Yeah, nothing against Devonta Smith, but they would take that trade if it was Jordan Hancock for Devonta Smith. Kerry Combs would be like, yeah, where do I sign up for that? Switching gears, Evan Pryor, the number 2 all-purpose back in the country, young man out of North Carolina, an Ohio State commitment. He posted on Twitter yesterday that he might not play his senior season at his high school. He said he's been the target of racism on social media, and he says if that doesn't change, if there's not social change at his high school, he either won't play his senior season or he will transfer to another school and play there. Now, maybe it's a case where this is going to wake some people up down there if he's been dealing with things like that, and things are going to change at his satisfaction. Obviously a touchy subject, but if he feels like he's been the target of racism, I'm glad that he's speaking up and doing what he can. These athletes are learning that they have a lot more power than maybe they thought they did. And if he sits out a senior season because of that, I would stand by him. If he switches to another school, I would stand by him. Now, hopefully we even have high school football. It's that's the elephant in the room. But again, it's a touchy subject. I'm sure people are listening to the show that are pissed we're even talking about it. But it's interesting. You have an Ohio State recruit. I don't think I've ever seen this before. Who was saying, of course, we're living in unprecedented times on many levels, Patrick. But I don't think I've ever seen an Ohio State recruit say, "Hey, I might not play my senior season of high school, especially for this reason." So hopefully everything gets ironed out there. But an interesting topic to say the least. Your thoughts on that?
I think as you said, these are unprecedented times, and we're seeing, athletes and celebrities and things like that kind of take things into their own hands, maybe more than we ever have. Now, from what Bill Kurlick wrote this morning, I believe it was, it sounds like, Pryor's not the only one. He's talked to some of his teammates. It's happened multiple times, and they've talked with the coaching staff about it, and they want to see change. And, I think that they have every right to demand that. I don't know specifics of what's happened or, what he's faced, but I don't think it necessarily matters. I think if he feels like he's being racially discriminated against at that school, then, putting pressure on the school, because he has a way to do that, being a, prized football player there. And obviously that's important to the school. If you want to keep me here, if you want me to play this season, let's do something about this. And if him and multiple of his teammates are all on the same page and they've all experienced the same thing, then I see no reason why that's a huge issue. I think hopefully it gets resolved and he's able to stay at the same school and play his high school season, like you said, assuming it happens. But I think you're going to see more of this until there's change for these black athletes, and it's the only way that I think they can get their message across is to use their kind of abilities to speak out and hold people accountable.
Evan Pryor, I'm sure you're listening to this show. If you do end up transferring schools, you might as well just come to Ohio. Hilliard-Bradley has a very good football program here in the school district I live in, and you're going to be going to Ohio State anyway. Might as well get a head start, and just sure that'll be very easy for his family just to up and move to Columbus. But if that's in the cards, Hilliard-Bradley would love to have you, Evan Pryor. All right, let's get into some freshman quarterbacks at Ohio State. It still is amazing to me that the Buckeyes signed two excellent quarterbacks in this 2020 class with C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller. Jack Miller was like the 5-star early, then he dropped to a 4-star. C.J. Stroud was like a 3-star. He was up to a 4-star Patrick, then he's a 5-star. And you're thinking, are they really both going to sign on this class? Yeah, they did. And are both guys going to be at Ohio State for 4 or 5 years? Probably not. One of them is probably going to transfer. But the bottom line is, great job by Ryan Day. And, these guys, one of these guys could be the starting quarterback next year in 2021. In fact, I'm on record saying I think C.J. Stroud will be the starting quarterback 2021. And I like Jack Miller a lot. I like his film. Durability has been his problem. Not toughness, but durability. As you know, you wrote stories this week on both C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller. Just your thoughts on both of these young men. How do you think this is going to, if you look into the future, you had to predict right now, how do you think this is going to pan out?
I do think it's remarkable that they were able to land both these guys. Obviously, this was a position of need given the lack of depth, quality depth at the position last year, which we talked about a lot behind Justin Fields. What's remarkable to me about both these guys is the fact that they don't seem to fear the competition at all. When we talked to them in February, both guys said they've already become good friends. They're going to lunch together. They're hanging out a lot outside of the facility, and they're willing to compete with anybody. They knew they were coming to Ohio State where they were going to have to compete. So that's the first thing. I think that's good news for Buckeye fans everywhere. And looking forward, it's tough to say. I really like Jack Miller. I do. And like you said, the biggest thing has been the durability and the injuries. If he can get past that, I think this is a legit quarterback competition that, we'll see some of hopefully in fall camp as they try and contend with Gunnar Hoke for the backup job. And then, obviously moving forward, we assume Justin Fields leaves after his junior season, contending for the starter. So I think C.J. Stroud, just because of what he's done lately, probably has a bit of an upper leg in most people's minds. But, they were, and I know you wrote about this earlier in the spring, they were set to start that quarterback battle now, and they didn't get that opportunity because of the, end of spring practice so early. So certainly missed reps there. I don't think that'll set either of them back in terms of their career down the line. But, if I'm looking in crystal ball, like you said, I think C.J. Stroud is probably the more likely, just, because of the injuries with Jack Miller. But if he stays healthy, it's close. I think both guys are very talented, and they proved that with what they did in high school. And I think the Stroud story is pretty remarkable. He was, just over a year ago, he was outside of the top 800 in the 247 rankings, and had a very good junior season. Now, he didn't start before his junior year at his high school in Rancho Cucamonga, but had a good junior season, but still wasn't on anyone's radar. And then skyrockets up with winning the Elite 11 MVP, the opening MVP, and then has a monster senior season. And Ohio State got involved with him right before the opening. That's when they first made contact. And it's a pretty crazy story. You just don't see that often, that a kid jumps that fast or that high that fast. So I'm interested to see how he goes. Both guys seem to be hungry. Both guys seem to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder for very different reasons. Jack Miller, because he dropped, because no one's thinks he can do it because of the injury, and CJ Stroud because he's been doubted for quite a while. So not only do I think Ohio State has two talented quarterbacks going forward, but they've got guys that have something to prove, which you always like to see.
Last thing on the show here. This is a topic I think you and I mildly disagree on. You have a lot of schools across the country that they're not releasing the names of players that get the coronavirus, but at Clemson, they're releasing the numbers. At the University of Houston, they're releasing the numbers. Kansas State, we could go on and on. Alabama. Seems like most schools are releasing the number of players. Ohio State has decided, A, we're of course not going to give you the names, and B, we're not going to tell you if there's 0 or 100 or somewhere in between. They're just not releasing the numbers of players that get coronavirus. So there could be, in fact, I imagine with them testing the players like they are, I'm sure there's Ohio State players right now that have tested positive, but they are not going to release that to the public. I don't have a problem with that, but I know you do. Explain.
I just think, I don't know if I would call it a problem, but I think if there's one thing that I disagree with what Ryan Day's done, and there's not many, and this may be the only thing.
This is the only thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to argue with what he's done, but
right,
with the way they've handled the injuries, and obviously for us, we would like to know injuries. We were used to getting some information on that from Urban and previous coaches, and we see it in other sports. And I think this stems from that is they don't release injury reports. We just get unavailable or game time decision. We don't get any information. Coaches don't talk about it. And so I think this falls in line with that. But I think it's a different scenario because, we're dealing with something unprecedented here. And I think, not that people deserve to know by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's information that's pertinent in the sense that, if you've done a good job of handling it, and that doesn't matter, however many players test positive when they arrive, that was out of Ohio State's control. These kids were at home. But, if you're seeing an increase in numbers once they're at Ohio State, or a decrease in numbers, which is what you want to see, you can say, hey, this program's doing a good job. This program's not. Here's where, here's what this program's doing. And maybe they're sharing that information internally. I don't know. But I think when you're hearing coaches come on, ESPN or various other things and openly talking about this, programs releasing it, I think it looks strange for Ohio State not to do it. I don't know if they're hiding anything. I doubt they probably are. They're just following the protocol that they have. But when it's become such an openly discussed thing, despite what Ezekiel Elliott might think, I just think it would behoove Ohio State to not look like, maybe there's something to hide here. And, maybe the flip side of that is, and, this may be what you're about to say, but, they don't want to have to deal with that. I don't know. I just think it would, if you say, hey, we had 3 cases, but they're been quarantined, we've taken care of it, or whatever the number is, I think that then people know, and then you're able to move on from it, as opposed to getting constant questions about it, which has happened.
I do wonder if a big reason why Ohio State is doing this, in addition to they're just tight-lipped, as you mentioned, about injuries and anything to deal with health in general, is they don't want stories out there. Like, I know I fell victim to this over the weekend. I saw the Clemson had 23 players test positive, and my heart sank. I'm like, oh man, I don't know if we're going to have a college football season. And you see stories like that, and you think deeper. You think, well, it's good that they're actually getting it now and not getting it in August. I wonder if Ohio State doesn't, let's say they had 15 players test positive. I wonder if Ohio State doesn't want it out there, because then all of a sudden you got people like me thinking, oh crap, you got 15 players test positive. How is there going to be a college football season? Let's just keep that in-house so there's not everybody out there freaking out and going crazy because they read stories like Clemson had 23 players test positive. Ohio State had 15. I get it. I hear what you're saying too. I just don't have a problem at all with what Ohio State's doing here.
Yeah, and I understand both sides of it. I really do. I just think, to play devil's advocate on that, like I said before, if you're not giving out the numbers, what are you hiding is a question that can be asked. And that doesn't mean they are or anything like that. So, but I do agree. I think it stems from their policy. And, if Ryan Day is going to be a stickler with that, which in his first season he very much was, then I guess it makes sense to stick with it. I just think this is a little bit of a different situation. You're not gaining any advantage by knowing this. They're not playing games right now. Coaches even acknowledged in this offseason that Master Teague had an Achilles injury. Maybe that was accidental, but I think when you're not playing games, there's a little bit more reason to divulge that kind of information. And this I don't know. I just think it would make sense to give it out just for nothing more than everyone else's, and you don't want to look like there's something strange here.
I do wonder, real quick, last thing about this, if the NCAA or the Big Ten, or there'll be some type of, even if it's just a gentleman's agreement that you don't have to release names, but during the season, if maybe teams will be required to announce, hey, we have X amount of guys that have the coronavirus. Maybe not. It'd be hard for the NCAA to really mandate that, but I wonder if Ohio State's stance will change once the season starts. They're not going to give out names, to be clear. Do you think there's any chance their stance will change, or they'll say, yeah, we got 5 guys this week that tested positive?
It might have to, because, whether it's the NCAA or not, if you have guys that test positive, they're going to be out for 2 weeks. I mean, based on how we're handling, quarantining and whatnot now. So, it'll be pretty apparent, I think, pretty quickly if, we're at interviews and you don't see a guy for, multiple interview sessions, or, if he's clearly ruled out for 2, I think you'll be able to tell, what the situation is. And I don't know if the NCAA.
You assume we're going to have interview sessions this year.
I guess that's a valid point.
Hey, sign me up for that. I want our interview sessions back. That would be a good sign. If we have interview sessions, things are going to be good in the fall. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. No, that was it. I just think it'll be fairly apparent if you have 4 or 5 guys that miss 2 games. Okay, those guys probably tested positive.
Right.
I think it'll be obvious. So why not just divulge the information at that point, and then that those kids had it, and you probably feel better about them going forward.
Yeah, Justin Fields is fine. We just decided to start Gunnar Hoke against Illinois and Michigan. He's fine now. He's good to go. We wanted to give Gunnar Hoke a chance there. Great stuff out of Patrick Murphy. Thank you very much, Patrick. And thank you to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. I appreciate that very much. Hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend. Let's have Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.